The crowded subway rattled with a relentless hum as people pressed against one another, tired eyes staring blankly ahead after a long day. Among them, a young woman named Alara sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the advertisements above. She had been on her feet for nearly 12 hours, working 2 jobs just to keep her tiny rented apartment and support her younger brother's studies. Every muscle in her body begged for rest, and the seat she had claimed on the train felt like a gift from fate. Yet, when her eyes caught the figure of a weary father stepping inside with his little girl clinging to his side, she didn't hesitate. The man looked exhausted, his shirt wrinkled, his tie loosened, and a briefcase dangling from one hand. But it was the little girl who caught Alara's attention, her small arms wrapped tightly around her father's waist, her eyelids heavy as though she had fought hard against sleep all day. Without a word, Alara rose from her seat and gestured toward them. "Please take this," she said softly. The father blinked, clearly surprised. "No, you've been sitting. I can manage." But Alara only smiled, insisting gently. "She needs it more than I do." The little girl's eyes sparkled with gratitude as her father lowered her into the seat. The man sat beside her, murmuring his thanks with a tired but genuine smile. "You didn't have to do that." "It's nothing," Alara replied, clutching the overhead rail as the train lurched forward. "Sometimes a small kindness can make a day better." The father studied her for a moment, something unreadable passing through his eyes. He didn't look like just any office worker. There was a sharpness in his features, an aura of quiet authority even in his fatigue, though his clothes were simple enough to blend in with the late-night commuters. Alara thought nothing of it. To her, he was simply a father doing his best. The train carried on, the girl's head soon resting against her father's shoulder as sleep overtook her. The man adjusted his grip around her protectively, his eyes softening. After a while, he glanced back at Alara, still standing, still steady despite her tiredness. "Most people wouldn't give up their seat," he said suddenly. "Not after a long day." Alara chuckled faintly. "Most people have their own struggles. I just thought your daughter needed it more. She reminded me of my little brother when he was her age." There was silence for a moment, broken only by the screech of tracks and the muffled announcements overhead. Then, with a quiet sincerity, the man said, "You'd be surprised how rare genuine compassion is, especially in a world that moves this fast." Alara shrugged, brushing off his words as if they were nothing. "Maybe, but I think kindness spreads. Sometimes it just takes one small gesture to remind someone else to do the same." The man's lips curved slightly, but his eyes carried something heavier, curiosity, perhaps admiration. When the train reached the next station, he rose, carefully lifting his daughter into his arms. Before stepping out, he turned back to her. "I didn't catch your name." "Alara," she replied. "Thank you, Alara," he said, his voice low but steady. "I hope life brings you more than what you give away." And then he was gone, vanishing into the night with his sleeping daughter in his arms. Alara leaned back against the wall of the subway car, unaware that she had just touched the life of a man whose influence stretched far beyond what she could imagine. She returned to her routine, working long shifts at the cafe by day and the library at night, scraping by with little time for herself. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. She almost forgot about the brief encounter with the father and his daughter on the subway. But fate had not forgotten her. One rainy evening, as she rushed to the cafe, soaked from the storm and clutching her broken umbrella, she noticed a sleek black car parked outside. It stood out sharply against the dim street, its tinted windows reflecting the glowing city lights. She didn't think much of it until she walked inside and found the same man, this time in a tailored suit, polished shoes, and an aura that commanded attention without effort. He was sitting at a corner table, his eyes lifting the moment she entered. Recognition flickered across his face. Alara froze in place, stunned. "You," he said, rising slowly. "Alara." She blinked, her heart skipping. "You remember me?" "I could never forget," he answered. The cafe seemed to quiet around them, as though the universe itself paused to acknowledge the moment. Alara didn't know yet that the man standing before her wasn't just another commuter, but Adrian Keston, the CEO of one of the most powerful corporations in the city, a man who had built an empire from nothing yet carried the weight of loneliness few could see. And in his memory, there lingered the image of a young woman giving up her only comfort on a crowded subway so his daughter could rest. An act so small to her, but monumental to him, because he had spent years surrounded by people who sought him for his wealth, his name, his empire. rarely for who he was as a father, as a man. Now, standing in the humble cafe where she worked, Adrian realized fate had offered him something he had long stopped believing in, a chance to truly see someone and to be seen. And Alara, still unaware of the storm she had stepped into, could only stare at him, wondering why the tired father she had once helped now seemed to carry the world at his feet, that Adrian's gaze lingered on her as though trying to reconcile two worlds. The one where she was just a stranger who gave up her seat, and the one where she stood now before him, soaked from the rain but carrying a quiet dignity that demanded his attention. Alara shifted awkwardly, brushing water from her sleeves, uncertain why his presence unsettled her so deeply. "You shouldn't be standing there," he said gently, motioning toward the chair opposite his. "Join me for a moment." Alara hesitated. She was on shift, and the cafe manager disliked her chatting with customers. But something in his tone carried weight, not authority, but a strange sincerity. Against her better judgment, she stepped forward, her footsteps soft against the tiled floor. She sat down, clutching the strap of her worn bag like a shield. Adrian studied her with quiet intensity, his tailored appearance in sharp contrast to the girl before him, who smelled faintly of coffee beans and rain. "I've been looking for you," he admitted. Her eyebrows shot up. "For me? Why?" "Because you reminded me that not everyone is driven by what they can take. You gave when you had little, and you did it without hesitation. That is rare." His voice softened as he leaned slightly forward. "I owe you more than gratitude." Alara blinked, trying to process his words. "You don't owe me anything. It was just a seat on the train. Anyone would have done it." Adrian's lips curved into a wry smile. "No, Alara. Most wouldn't have. I've lived long enough to know the difference." She didn't understand why his words carried such gravity, but something about the way he looked at her made her chest tighten. Still, she shook her head lightly. "I think you overestimate me. Or perhaps you underestimate yourself," he countered, his eyes unwavering. Before she could respond, the cafe manager called her name sharply, reminding her she was there to work, not sit with patrons. Flustered, Alara stood quickly. "I should get back," she said, almost apologetically. Adrian inclined his head, understanding. "I won't keep you. But, would you allow me to see you again?" Her heart stuttered at the question. She didn't know this man, not really. And yet, there was something disarming about his presence, something that pushed past her walls. Still, caution made her voice firmer than she felt. "I don't think that would be a good idea. My life is complicated." A faint shadow crossed his expression, but he didn't press. Instead, he slipped a card across the table. "If you ever change your mind, you'll know where to find me." Alara glanced at the card, the embossed logo glinting faintly under the warm cafe lights. Keston Global. Her breath caught. She had heard of the corporation. Everyone had. It was everywhere: technology, real estate, finance. And this man was its CEO. When she looked back up, he was gone, leaving only the echo of his presence and the card that suddenly felt impossibly heavy in her hand. That night, she lay awake in her tiny apartment, staring at the ceiling. Her brother, already asleep in the next room, breathed softly, unaware of the storm swirling in her mind. Why would someone like him, someone who could command boardrooms and bend industries, care about her? She was just a girl scraping by, clinging to her dreams by fragile threads. And yet, he had remembered her, sought her out. Days passed. She tucked the card into a book, convincing herself she'd never use it. Life was too busy, too consuming. The cafe needed her. The library job couldn't be missed. Her brother's tuition hung over her like a constant reminder of responsibility. She couldn't risk being distracted. But fate, it seemed, was relentless. One evening, as she left the library, she found herself caught in another downpour. She ducked beneath a canopy, waiting for the rain to ease, when a familiar black car rolled to a stop beside her. The window lowered, and Adrian's face appeared, lit by the glow of the city lights. "You'll catch a cold standing there," he said, his voice carrying through the patter of rain. Alara froze. "What are you doing here?" "Passing by. Or perhaps the universe refuses to let us part ways so easily." His tone was smooth, but there was a flicker of something earnest in his eyes. "Let me give you a ride." She hesitated. Accepting would mean stepping into a world far removed from her own. Refusing would mean denying the strange pull she felt toward him. After a long pause, she exhaled. "Just this once." The warmth of the car was almost disorienting after the chill of the storm. Adrian sat beside her, his presence commanding yet strangely comforting. For a while, they rode in silence, the city's neon lights streaking past the windows. Finally, he spoke. "Tell me about you." She blinked. "Me? There's nothing much to tell. Let me be the judge of that." So haltingly at first, she shared pieces of herself, her late parents, the burden of caring for her younger brother, the long hours she worked to keep them afloat, the dreams she had once nurtured of becoming a writer but had set aside for survival. Adrian listened intently, his expression unreadable, yet his silence heavy with understanding. When she finished, embarrassed by how much she had revealed, she murmured, "See, nothing extraordinary." But his response was firm. "On the contrary, you're extraordinary because you endure, because you keep giving when you have nothing left. That strength is rarer than you know." Her throat tightened, caught off guard by his words. No one had ever said that to her before. People saw her as reliable, hardworking, maybe selfless, but never extraordinary. Their conversations grew from that night. Sometimes brief encounters, sometimes lingering talks that stretched until dawn. He never flaunted his wealth, never tried to impress her with grandeur. Instead, he showed her the man behind the title, the father who adored his daughter, the man who had built an empire but longed for authenticity, the soul weary of being surrounded by masks. And Alara, despite her resistance, found herself drawn to him. Not for his power or position, but for the way he listened, the way he saw her not as a struggling waitress or a nameless commuter, but as someone worthy of being known. Yet beneath it all, fear gnawed at her. She belonged to a different world, one of survival, not privilege. How could she fit into his life without losing herself? How could someone like her ever stand beside someone like him without being swallowed by doubt and judgment? Adrian seemed to sense her hesitation, though he never forced answers. Instead, he remained steady, patient, as though he trusted time to carve the path between them. One evening, as they walked through a quiet park after his driver had dropped them off, his daughter ran ahead, her laughter ringing through the night air. Alara watched her twirl beneath the lampposts, carefree and radiant, and felt a pang of something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. "She likes you," Adrian said quietly, his eyes fixed on his daughter. Alara's heart skipped. "She's a sweet child. She doesn't warm to people easily," he continued. "But with you it's different. You've given her something I can't." Alara frowned softly. "What do you mean?" "Normalcy," he admitted, his voice tinged with a vulnerability she hadn't expected. "Her life has always been overshadowed by who I am, by the world watching us. But when she's with you, she's just a little girl. No expectations. No barriers." The weight of his confession settled between them, delicate yet profound. Alara looked at him then, really looked, and saw not the CEO, not the empire, but the man who carried responsibilities that stretched beyond wealth. And for the first time, she wondered if fate hadn't brought them together by accident, but by design, two lives colliding in a moment of kindness that now unfolded into something neither had dared to imagine. The days that followed became a tapestry woven with unexpected colors, the kind that made Alara question everything she had believed about life, fate, and herself. What had begun as a fleeting moment on a crowded subway was now an intricate story, drawing her deeper into a world she had never dared to dream of. Adrian did not overwhelm her with his wealth or status. He never needed to. Instead, it was his quiet constancy, his unshakable presence, and his daughter's innocent laughter that filled the spaces of her weary heart with something it had long been starved of: hope. Alara had always lived with the belief that her existence was meant for survival, that dreams were luxuries she could not afford. Her days had been marked by exhaustion, her nights by worry, and her heart by silent sacrifices no one ever noticed. Yet standing beside Adrian and his daughter, she began to feel the boundaries of that life expand. It was as if the universe was whispering to her that she was never meant to be invisible, that her kindness, her strength, and her resilience were the very things that made her extraordinary in ways money could never measure. But as their connection deepened, so too did the whispers of doubt. People began to notice. The wealthy circles Adrian moved in raised eyebrows when they saw him with her. To them, she was an outsider, a girl of little means who had no place in the glittering world of CEOs and billionaires. They questioned her intentions, whispered cruel words behind her back, and painted her as someone seeking advantage. Alara heard the rumors. She felt the sharpness of their judgment. And for a moment, she wondered if perhaps they were right, that she was stepping into a life where she could never truly belong. It was Adrian who silenced those doubts, not with grand declarations, but with a truth so steady it shook her fears. "Alara," he told her one evening, his voice low and certain as his daughter slept beside them. Everything I have built means nothing if I cannot share it with someone who sees me. Not the empire, not the money, not the power, but me. You saw me when no one else did, on a night when I was just a tired father with a sleeping child. That is the truth I will hold on to, no matter what the world says. Tears stung her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of being seen, truly seen, in a way she had never allowed herself to imagine. For once, she did not run from it. She let his words sink into the cracks of her soul where loneliness had lived for far too long. In the weeks that followed, Adrian's actions spoke louder than words ever could. He introduced her to his world not as someone beneath it, but as someone who belonged by his side. At charity galas, at board dinners, at press events, he never faltered in treating her with a reverence that silenced the whispers around them. He made it clear to all who doubted that Alara was not a fleeting presence in his life, but the anchor he had been searching for. Yet it was not in the glimmering halls of wealth where their bond shone brightest, but in the quiet moments, the evenings where they cooked together in her small apartment, laughing over burnt bread. The afternoons spent at the park where his daughter tugged at Alara's hand as though she had always been part of their family. The nights when he would listen as she read aloud pieces of her writing, encouraging her to chase the dream she had long abandoned. For Alara, love did not arrive with diamonds or roses. It arrived with presence, with a father's devotion to his child, with a man's steady belief in her worth. It arrived in moments so simple, yet so profound, that they outshone every glittering chandelier and every gilded ballroom. One evening, beneath the amber glow of a fading sunset, Adrian took her hand as they stood on the balcony of his home, the city sprawling beneath them like a sea of stars. His daughter slept soundly inside, her laughter still echoing faintly in the walls of their hearts. Adrian turned to Alara, his expression a mixture of vulnerability and strength. "You gave me something I thought I had lost forever," he said softly. "You gave me the reminder that kindness still exists, that love can be simple and pure, that family is built not by wealth but by the bonds we choose. I want to build the rest of my life with you, not as the CEO the world knows, but as the man you met that night on the subway, exhausted and unseen, until you chose to see me." Alara's breath caught as tears filled her eyes, not from uncertainty, but from the clarity of knowing that this moment, was what life had been preparing her for all along. The universe had taken her sacrifices, her hardships, her endless nights of survival, and had led her here, not to a fairy tale escape, but to a love that honored who she truly was. And as she looked into his eyes, she realized that her kindness had not just given a tired father a seat on a crowded train. It had set into motion a story of transformation, one that would carry them all into a future filled not with riches of wealth, but with riches of the heart. From that day forward, their lives became inseparable threads in the same fabric. Adrian continued to lead his empire, but with Alara by his side, he found himself more grounded than ever, no longer chasing the empty victories of power, but savoring the quiet victories of family. Alara, in turn, discovered her voice again. She began to write, not just for herself but for others, pouring her story into words that inspired thousands, reminding the world that even the smallest acts of compassion could ripple into destinies unimagined. The whispers of doubt from the world around them never fully faded, but they no longer mattered. What mattered was the laughter of a child who now had a mother figure who loved her as fiercely as her father did. What mattered was the hand Adrian held every night, a promise that no storm could break. What mattered was the life they built together, one born not from wealth or circumstance, but from a single act of kindness on a crowded subway that proved love often arrives when we least expect it. And so, what began as a weary man and his daughter finding rest in the kindness of a stranger became a story that no one who witnessed it would ever forget. A story not of wealth, but of worth, not of power, but of love, not of fate, but of the extraordinary beauty that unfolds when two souls, seemingly worlds apart, recognize each other in the simplest, most human moment. For in the end, it was never about the seat she gave away. It was about the life they chose to share, the family they became, and the reminder to all who heard their story that sometimes the smallest gesture carries the power to change everything.